Welcome everybody to this Thursday morning. This will be a 2-hour core class. The title is Federal Real Estate Laws. I'm just trying to see if I can get my machine to roll here. There we go. Just to recap on those rules, Leslie, I've just quickly gone through in case someone has just joined us. I'm obliged to share it on the screen anyway. Display your full name on the screen. Of course, have your video turned on for the full class. Microphone needs to be working so that we can interact. I can ask you questions, you can ask me questions, and we can share ideas. Be in attendance for the whole of the class. And of course, make sure the microphone is working. Oh, I've already said that, haven't I? There we go. And we should have those 3 keywords. Okay, no credit for driving. And of course, we will have the 3 keywords show when this icon pops up on the screen. So quite a good class this is. Please just unmute and just chime in if you've got anything to say or any questions or thoughts or comments. And certainly, I'm sure we can learn from each. We've got a lot of people here that I've seen before with a lot of experience, so we should be able to share some good ideas on this. We'll cover the following: Federal Fair Housing Laws, the Americans with Disabilities Act, Equal Credit Opportunity, Truth in Lending, which is Regulation Z. We'll talk about the Real Estate Settlement Procedure Act. And of course, we'll just touch on that Sherman Antitrust Act, Uniform Commercial Code, and Environmental Protection Agency. So we'll try and get through all those, finish up with the National Do Not Call Law, which might be helpful if you've not seen that before. So that's what we'll do over the next couple of hours. All real estate transactions are governed by federal statutes and combination of common law and state law, which can vary obviously from state to state. Real estate brokers are employed as the agent of the seller to obtain a buyer for their property. Listing agreement is the written contract between the broker and the seller. Salespersons, brokers, principal brokers are licensed and regulated by local state laws. An agreement between a buyer and a seller of real estate is governed by the general principles of contract law. A contract is legally enforceable agreement between 2 or more parties where each has a legal obligation that must be completed. Anybody got any questions on that slide? Okay, just make sure I understand that our contracts are between ultimately the broker and the seller. We are the mediator between that. We're part of that contract, but we are the person that joins them together. Property law in the real estate world in the United States, we'll have a look at that. So legally binding agreement, defining governing rights and duties between the 2 parties, enforceable when it meets the requirements applicable to law. So that's what we're involved in. Certainly as real estates, we have a responsibility to make sure that we are totally honest and ethical, and we abide by the law in all of our agreements and contracts with these parties. Let's tee it up. This is the Lady Justice. Anybody can tell me a little bit about this, this symbol that most of you should be familiar with. As you know, I come from England. You've probably figured that from my accent. But I have learned about this since I've been over here. Anybody tell me anything about that symbolization that we have there? They've all gone silent on me. Let's talk about this symbol. I should be loading in a screen in a moment. Let's see if that is loading in. Why that's not loading. Let's just quickly try that again. There we go. So have you ever heard of that before? So those 3 symbols we have there, the sword representing state authority, the scales represent an objective standard, and the blindfold represents impartiality. Anybody aware of that or heard of that before? I can see Joshua, he says, no, not heard of that before. So I thought I might share this with you and see if it might be interesting, because this is quite an important symbol in the United States. When we look at this Lady Justice, it does represent some core values that we are or should be able to abide by. So let's have a look at these, shall we? See if we can learn something. So the sword, there you have it, basically authority. So as a realtor, you have authority. You're all licensed. You represent your brokerage. Obviously, you are part of the National Association of Realtors and also the Utah Department of Commerce Division of Real Estate. And you're a member of the board, like the Salt Lake Board of Realtors or whichever board you're a member of. So we have some authority to operate and serve and work within this profession. Let me bring in someone. Jenny, it's good to have you with us today, Jenny. I had Jenny with us yesterday. She's such a good contributor. Talk to us a little bit about how important our authority is as a realtor when we're working in this industry.
It's very important. I mean, they rely on us for our information, for us protecting them. It's very important. We're the guides that are the people that are guiding them through the process.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. They are relying on us. That's why they're hiring us. And as Jenny quite rightly said, we have knowledge, we have information, and we should know our way around this little journey or this course or however these transactions pan out. They're expecting us to be able to look out for them. Super. Anybody else got any comments they might want to share or add to what we just discussed on the authority part of our role? Okay, let's look at the scales. And this is quite interesting. Obviously, we keep to federal and Utah state laws. Obviously, all of our agreements and contracts, are produced by, I presume, the best lawyers in town that put those together. So, we're following a good lead there. Full disclosure from us, our brokerage and our clients to the other party. Real important that is. Who'd like to talk to me about how important that objective standard is? Who have we got here? Ryan, how are you today? You still there, Ryan? Do you want to chime in and give us your thoughts on that? He's just learning how to unmute, I think.
Ryan, you're muted. You need to unmute.
You can't help him on that, Leslie Ann? Or...
No, he needs to click on his microphone and unmute. It's for most people, it's along the bottom of your screen.
Or you might be able to do Shift Command.
You can also hit the space bar. You can also hit the space bar and hold it down.
All right.
There it is.
I got this thing working.
There you go, Ryan. How are you today, Ryan? Good to see you today. How are you?
I'm doing well for a fat man.
Yeah. Brilliant. You got a few smiles on that one. Talk to us about the scales, the objective standard. How important is this?
Well, you're trying to balance everything as it goes through. You're trying to keep your responsibility to the client and the responsibility to your broker, plus being and along with the legal side to make sure that everybody stays safe.
Yeah, great comment. And I think it's good that they are symbolic of scales there, because that is exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to make this balance. And sometimes with a transaction, it may go a little bit out of balance, and our role as a realtor is to work carefully and closely with that other party to make sure we keep the scales in balance and that we can all travel through this journey comfortably. Let's look at the blindfold. And who'd like to help me on the blindfold? Obviously, we do not discriminate against anybody. Everyone is entitled to be treated with the same respect, importance, value, and courtesy. Joshua, how would you like to tell us your thoughts on that screen? How important that blindfold is? We are going to go into a bit more detail on this area a bit later on in this course. But let me see if
I think it's really important. I think it's really important, right? We get taught that we have a fiduciary duty to our client, whoever we're representing. And so part of that is being able to put that blindfold on and say, I don't have any special treatment for anyone that is different than myself. And yes. I think everyone in a religious standpoint is either a son or a daughter of God. And so in the end, who cares how we look? It's all, we're all together and united in one way or another, which could be in values or personal likes or dislikes. We all have something in common.
Perfect. Thanks for sharing that, Joshua. Great thoughts there. And yeah, let's make sure we treat everybody the same. So when you look at that symbol, just remember you've got those three pieces of the symbol, the sword, the scales, and the blindfold. And let's make sure that we're all comfortably placed within our profession to be in harmony with that symbol. All right, so that brings us to our first keyword. That's one of our Bernese mountain dogs, Rosie. And our first keyword on this class will be everyone, EVERYONE. That should be shouting out on your screen. So just write that down. I will not repeat this again, and we cannot share it in chat. It's only going to be shared once. At the end of this class, Leslie Ann will share with you a link, and you'll be able to put the keywords in the link and submit your form. Anybody got any questions on what we said so far? Are we all good? All right. So let's talk about property law in the United States. Of course, we have various forms of ownership, and we are familiar with these. Of course, we've got land. We have also got buildings, which most of us are interested in. And of course, we've got personal property. So they're basically the three main forms of ownership of property law that we are involved in as realtors. Federal fair housing laws. First federal housing law was 1866, and we've got the civil rights in 1968. We've got the amendment in 1988. We have the discrimination against handicapped, accessibility and adaptability with properties and buildings. And then, of course, we've got the penalties and risk reduction. So let's have a little look at those and see what we can learn. We'll start off with the federal fair housing laws. Might be familiar with that little painting. It's quite a nice painting, that one, I think. Right after the end of the Civil War, which was 1861 to 1865, in 1866, United States Congress passed the Civil Rights Act. This law essentially prohibits discrimination in the purchase, sale, lease, or conveyance of real property on the basis of race and colour. This act prohibited race discrimination only, and there were no exceptions. Unfortunately, though, the wording was a little vague, and therefore in many circumstances was quite difficult to enforce. And as we know with history, much of it wasn't enforced as well as it should have been enforced. So we go to that section 42 in the 1982 Property Rights, and we read this: all citizens of the United States shall have the same right in every territory as is enjoyed by white citizens thereof to inherit, purchase, lease, sell, hold, or convey real and personal property. And that's that section note at the bottom there, started in 1978 and finished up in with this 1982 rights. So we got our President Lyndon B. Johnson there on April the 11th in 1968, basically signed into law the Civil Rights Act of 1968. This was a landmark law enacted and basically established precedents that determine significant new legal principles or concepts, or otherwise affecting the interpretation of the existing law. So it kind of made it a bit clearer. We still haven't gone all the way yet, but in 1968, we have made this law easier to understand, and have got most people now following it. Under the direction of the Department of the Housing and Urban Development, which we know as the HUD or the HUD, this act was administered by the Office of Equal Opportunity. Civil Rights Act made it unlawful to discriminate based on any of the following. We basically got the race and the colour. We've got religion, sex, national origin. They were the five first ones that were put together in that law. And basically we've got in this law clear indication, refusing to sell or rent or negotiate, altering any terms or the rental agreement, advertising that excludes certain groups of people or organizations, denying the right to inspect, steering customers or clients to or away from certain areas of discrimination, and also the block busting, which is the panic peddling because of increase of ethnic or minority groups that might be moving into an area. Has anybody ever seen any block busting, sort of panic peddling happen in their years of real estate? I know we've got some agents here who have been doing this for a number of years. I think in this state we're pretty good at that, actually, following line. Red line is another area that in more recent years was a bit of a challenge, where we've got lenders refusing to give loans to certain populated areas, but I think that has now smoothed out a little bit. Anybody got any stories or anything they'd like to share on that slide? Okay, let's see if we can dig down in some of these. So we do know that in 1988 that amendment came in and added these two new protected classes. One was familial status, the other of course was the disability. Anybody like to share with me why they think the familial status was important to add to this federal fair housing laws? All right, you know I operate, don't you? If I don't hear anybody, I just invite someone to chime in. Let's have Susie. How would you like to unmute and say hello to everybody today? Is it Suzette? Could you unmute and?
Oh, you said Susie. I'm Suzette.
Sorry, my eyes were going a little bit dim there. I could see the S-U-Z, but not the rest.
You got the S-U.
How are you today?
Really good. The Disability Act actually is one that I'm more strongly familiar with, because these are getting stronger and stronger laws and ADA rules, and they definitely know them. And the ADA, you know, people know them better than anybody. In even renting properties, you know, I'm learning a lot about that because I have some rentals, and there's things you have to be super careful about to not discriminate against. And then even if you're not discriminating, you have to be super careful not even to slightly even look like it. So I'd actually like to hear more about this from you, because I'm really nervous in that department.
Yeah, we do have to be a bit nervous, because ignorance of the law doesn't necessarily stop us getting fined. You know, they're expecting us to know. So I'm glad you raised that. And obviously you've got some rented properties, and it is becoming very important that we figure out what the law is and make sure that we've got those gangways the right width, and the doors the right width, and the handles and the switches and all those things have got to be accessible by those that may have some disability. So we'll have a look at these and see if we can learn a little bit as we drill down. Let's start off with this familial status. Okay, who'd like to read that for me? Let's see, we've got Robbie. Would you like to read that for me? I've not heard from you yet.
Sure. You cannot discriminate on the basis of familial status, children under the ages of 18, or anyone who is handicapped. A person who is handicapped is described as physical or mental impairment, which limits one or more major life activities. This does not include someone who abuses controlled substances.
Perfect. Any comments on that, Robbie, you'd like to share?
You know, I think one of the things that I've come across is with the familial status is the love letters that sellers get from families. You know, what exactly, how far can you go with that? You know, you hear sellers say a lot, I'd really like to get a family in here. I don't know, I like that touched on a little bit, because I feel like sometimes you might be going into that when you get those letters.
Yeah, very, very good to highlight. I have actually got a screen on that a bit further on in this presentation, where we'll talk a little bit about the love letters, and particularly when we're dealing in this market with, which is obviously a seller's market, where we obviously getting multiple offers. So we will dig down a little bit deeper on that a bit later on, but thanks for highlighting that. And of course, you know, let's be aware that in this modern world, often we do have families that are of different combinations. You know, a lot of single parent families there, and you know, we need to make sure that everybody is treated the same and that we don't in any way discriminate against familial status, or status as it is over here. Every now and again I put the English word in there because I can't remember which is which. I've been over here that long, but it is status over here, isn't it? In England we say status. That's interesting, isn't it? Disability, can't refuse to make modifications or exceptions, and Suzette will know this because she just highlighted this area. If such changes are necessary to provide for full enjoyment, notice that word, full enjoyment. For example, wider corridors for wheelchair access, including pets such as guide dog for the blind. Do you like my guide dog there for the blind? I thought it was a nice little pair of spectacles he's got on there. Looks quite good. So let's just make sure we fully understand this law and we are sensitive to everyone. Discrimination in housing based upon race, colour, religion, sex, national origin, familial status, or disability prohibits discrimination by direct providers of housing, such as landlords and real estate companies, as well as other entities such as municipalities, banks, or other lending institutions, and homeowners insurance companies whose discriminatory practice may housing unavailable to such persons. So
well, you're moving on. Can I just make one comment going back to your disability? The other thing I was getting nailed on was, you know, your mind goes to that wheelchair, you know, type situations. But right now with the animals, whatever animal, as a security situation, you can't discriminate against that when I have rules from my places that I don't want animals. But now I'm getting nailed because as long as they have a certain card, I have to take the animal, you know, in these rentals. So that's not just, it's just another thing to think about. It's not just the wheelchairs and those obvious ones, but it's the special dogs, emotion dogs, those.
Yeah, Suzette is right. What's interesting though is you can decide to go with another individual without discriminating if that individual is qualified for the specifications that you require for your rental. So that's kind of how I get around it, is if there is someone that's better qualified and there's someone that has reached out to me about renting my house or renting my place, then I can accept them over the individual with the support animal, not because I'm discriminating, but just because in my mind, it's going to be a better fit with that other individual. So.
Right. It's such a sticky situation that I was in, and she was pressing me for that. And I really had someone else ahead of her, and their financial things were stronger. But she knew the stuff to press me on. And I cannot charge extra dog fees that I would normally if I allowed a dog.
Correct. The key thing here is if you're choosing someone above someone else, which conflicts with those 7 different areas of housing, or you're in default. Okay, you can only choose a better client or buyer if it is concerned with the price, the circumstances of the agreement, you know, all the nuts and bolts. It doesn't matter, or it doesn't make any change to those 7 areas. That's why you have to be careful on. That's why that person was pushing you, Suzette, because you know she wanted to make sure that you were not discriminating her because of those laws. So with your point there, Josh, you just got to be careful that if you choose someone else, it doesn't move into the pot of discrimination. That's the biggest area here we have to be careful of. You know, someone may say, I want a parrot because, you know, that parrot is it reduces my anxiety, and it's a needful pet in my life. Okay, and then we've got to add the parrot in there. So that's what you have to be careful of. That's why Suzette was saying, you know, this is quite a deep it's quite a deep hole once we get into it, and it can be unlimited depth. So we have to be very careful that we're protecting ourselves, because I also believe that particularly in this country, people will sue you. I call America the land of sue, because they'll sue you for anything if they can sue you for it. And I'm not being disrespectful to anybody. I'm just saying that this country does have the ability to have lots of lawyers that are quite ready and able to take on a case. So just really be careful. That's the real important part of this. I put a note here: sometimes housing providers have tried to disguise their discrimination by giving false information about availability of housing, either saying that nothing was available or steering home seekers to certain areas based on race. Individuals who receive such false information, misdirection, and may have no knowledge that they have been victims of discrimination. So we've got to be real careful. And finally, the Department of Fair Housing seeks to uncover such kind of hidden discrimination and hold these people accountable. Anybody have a comment on that? I think they'd like to add.
Stephen, I just wanted to make a comment going back to the dogs, because I think they've done a little bit of a crackdown on that, the difference between an actual guide dog that is actually licensed and required for someone with a disability versus somebody that says, you know, I've got an emotional issue and this is my emotional support animal. And I think they've done some cracking down on that, because it has put a little bit of an onus on the landlords. And, you know, fly by night people are saying, you know, this snake is my emotional support animal, when, you know, clearly it's not. But then as a landlord, we also have to kind of navigate that fine line when we're questioning whether it's an actual.
Oh, you just muted yourself, Alan. Just press your space bar. You should be able to come back.
Oh, there we go. Sorry. There I am. I don't know what was missed, but
we got the snake.
You got the snake. Okay. With the emotional support animals, you have to be a little bit careful because of the questions that you do or do not ask, because then you start delving into some of the issues that have to do with medical and HIPAA and whatnot. But I know that they've done some cracking down on that, and that there have been some things for differentiating between the two. You know, somebody just making a claim that I need this animal versus I really need this animal. So
they have forms now that they could fill out, and it's almost like a handicap thing, you know, so they have to fill out forms, and then they have papers. I have the papers to show, so they know. And so if they got the papers, you don't ask.
Yeah, and often they can get a doctor's note or certificate that can support what they're saying if they really need it. So yeah, it's definitely becoming much more complex. And what we've got to be careful of in our industry is that we are as far away from this problem as possible, because unfortunately we could end up being fined or even losing our license if it can be proved that we've discriminated against someone. Very good. Thanks for sharing that.
I do have a question.
Thank you. Who's that speaking?
Betty Jo Garlock.
Oh, Betty. Hello, Betty. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
How good? How long have you been a realtor for? Good to have you with us.
6 years this month. So
well done. Well done.
Yes.
Good to have you with us. Oh, tell us what your thoughts are.
So I had a client that bought an investment property. It's only her second investment property in Utah. And so she actually reached out. This was just last week. They found a renter. It was great qualifications. They moved forward to having her move in or finish the process to get their application turned in, and they accepted it. And then after everything was accepted, they came out and said that, hey, we have 2 emotional support cats. And it kind of just opened up this huge thing, because she was like, you know, they didn't tell us about the cats. They, you know, the only legal, because they came to me for advice, and I was like, I don't think we can deny them, because, you know, even though she's like, but they lied, they didn't bring this up in the beginning in the process. So I said, well, a lot of people do that because of discrimination. So I know there's a couple loopholes, like if you own less than 4 properties, you don't have to accept it, or you have to basically fire your property manager and get a new one, then it voids out that application. But where's the fine line of, you know, how do you not discriminate, but also, I guess it's kind of a hard, I don't know where to stand there, just because it's happening a lot, because I have a ton of investor clients, and is a cat an emotional support animal that, like, do they have to rent it out to that person?
Yeah, great comments. And that fine line seems to be moving. So we can't sort of say it's here in concrete, because it probably isn't. Yeah, I would probably say most of the domestic animals can be used as a support animal in, anxiety issues or need for human help. And if they get a certificate that says that, then most likely we're going to have to accept that.
Okay.
Anybody got any thoughts or comments they want to respond to that?
So Stephen, how does that apply to, I know, this is Rod, by the way. I know there's a lot of rentals out there that they have weight limits on, like dogs and things like that. Those kind of things, or certain types of breeds, and that kind of thing. If say these people have, and I know these people have to go through the process of getting their animals certified. They have to fill out a form, get it certified, whatever. But like, so my daughter, for instance, she has a 140-pound Rottweiler. And so for her to rent something is almost impossible. I mean, she lives in our house. He's just a big, giant teddy bear, I guess you could say. He's very gentle and stuff, very kind, but he's very intimidating to a lot of people. And people are like, well, he'll destroy my property and that. So if she had a certification, would that get her past those kind of things? Because we're not here to help, we don't want to destroy people's property, but I feel like it's kind of it is that line that's moving. It's like, these people are kind of handcuffed by this stuff. And how do we handle that properly, I guess?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't have the answer. Obviously, if there were certain rules in the CC&Rs that, only such a particular size of dog will be acceptable in that area or that building, then of course they would not qualify. But other than that, they probably would have to accept that animal. So it's difficult, and as we just said, that fine line does keep moving. We just got to make sure we do as much homework as we possibly can, figure out what the rules are for the property or the area, and make sure we're making decisions based on those rules.
And at least have in your rental advertising, which I had, no pets allowed. That kind of starts that conversation to begin with.
And you may not be having pets for another reason, okay? So say, for instance, you're in maybe you're renting out an apartment, and there is no room for pets, because that's the way the buildings are created, and there's nowhere the pet can go to relieve themselves. Then it's not the best place for pets, is it? And so those people that may need a pet may have to find a different type of housing. So what Suzette is saying is, look at the rules and highlight those areas which may or may not be comfortable with the folk, but highlight it from the outside so you can get that conversation going. But that's a difficult one, Rod.
I'd like to jump in. I'm very careful about giving people legal advice, and I think that if you've got investors and they're looking to you about these pet laws, this to me is a good time to pass it on to somebody else, because we don't know the rules on this stuff, and we really shouldn't even look at the rules and try and interpret them for them. I mean, we can do our own stuff, but when we're talking with clients, that is outside of our responsibility, I feel. But
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect, Julie. And we clearly say that in all our agreements.
Yeah.
Remember, we are experts at marketing real estate. Remember that line? And everything else.
And I think I think it's a very slippery slope. There's a lot of entitlement, a lot, like the Rottweiler owner, I just think it's a super risky conversation when we're talking about advising our clients. And I think we need to back down on that. That's my opinion.
I think it's perfect. Yeah. Don't get involved.
Yeah.
Get them to get their own legal advice and do their own due diligence. Okay, let's go through a few of these. We'll talk about this one, onto religion. Who'd like to read that one for me? Who's not spoke yet? Phil, would you like to read that for us? Let's see if I can pull Phil in.
Yep.
Thanks,
The
Phil.
Housing Act prohibits discrimination in housing based upon religion. This prohibition covers instances of overt discrimination against members of a particular religion, as well as direct actions such as zoning ordinances designed to limit the use of private homes as a place of worship. The act does contain a limited exception that allows non-commercial housing operated by a religious organization to reserve such housing to persons of the same religion.
Okay. You like to comment on that, Phil? Any thoughts or comments on that line?
I don't know, so that's pretty straightforward there. You know, just as everything else we've talked about as far as discrimination goes. I mean, you don't want to put on your application, what church do you belong to? Do you attend church? Those type of things.
Perfect. Obviously, that last line is talking about really churches or, buildings that are used for church meetings. Anybody else got any comments on the religion? Discrimination of?
I'll jump in again.
Thank you.
Because I feel that this is, once again, a very slippery slope. We have a deep culture, religious. We are founded by people in the LDS religion, and it is so ingrained in the culture that people do not realize what they're saying. And I think that, once again, it's a very, very slippery slope on this type of stuff. And I still get, because I am not a member of the LDS Church. And so it's very apparent to me when I'm in conversations and people just are so accustomed to it, they don't even realize that they are saying things like, bring us a nice Mormon family, So it's out there. It is still very much out there.
Yeah, and sometimes even when you're sharing a home, you might say, "Oh, there's a nice view of the temple," or whatever it may be. So we just have to be careful what sort of language we use. Absolutely, very good. Yeah, we just got to try and be neutral in this modern world so we don't upset anybody on either side.
Oh, it's super tricky. Yeah, very tricky.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Let's go. Stay with me, Julia. Maybe you could read this one for me. This is on the sex department, discrimination based on sex or sexual harassment. Would you like to read that one for me, please?
The whole paragraph?
Yeah, that'd be great if you could.
The Fair Housing Act, it makes it unlawful to discriminate in housing on the basis of sex. Women, particularly those who are poor and with limited housing options, often have little recourse, should not tolerate the humiliation and degradation of sexual harassment, or risk having their families and themselves removed from their homes. The department's enforcement program is aimed at landlords who create an untenable living environment by demanding sexual favors from tenants or by creating a sexually hostile environment for them. Such tenants who have been treated unfairly by a landlord because of sex, and also deter other potential abusers, cannot continue their conduct without facing repercussions. In addition, pricing discrimination on mortgage lending may also adversely affect women, particularly minority women. This type of discrimination is unlawful under both the Fair Housing Act and Equal Credit Opportunity Act.
Perfect, wonderfully read. Thank you, Julia. Any comments on that, Julia?
Oh, I'm a little older, so my mind is still blown that we're, still struggling with this type of stuff. But we've made great progress, and I'm glad for these classes to bring these points out, because they're still they're still a part of our life.
Yeah, great comment. Anybody would like to comment on that slide? And we got any stories like to share, any thoughts that may be useful for us? Those of you who are dealing with rented accommodation like Suzette and Joshua, have you seen any areas that have been disappointing in your career working with rented accommodation you might want to share that might be related to this particular area of discrimination? No? Okay, good.
I actually haven't. No, I haven't seen anything relating to discrimination with women. I haven't heard of anything either. So, yeah.
Okay. Hopefully we're good in that area, but I presume it still happens, otherwise we wouldn't have it there to remind us.
Hey, Stephen.
Yes, thank you, Ryan.
Along that same line, my major question that I'm seeing is the LGBT based upon the sex of the people that are there, and also both their religion and their beliefs, being gay, homosexual, whatever you want to call it. And that's being discriminated also. Is that still wanted? Even though it's not one of the listed classes?
Well, it is actually under the discrimination against sex, really. That is kind of where it falls. But you're absolutely right. That is definitely a growing area that we need to be careful of. People's relationships should not be involved in whether or not we decide to choose them above or not choose them above someone else with renting or real estate sales. Good. Let's look at the national origin. And maybe while you're still with me, Ryan, would you mind reading this one for me? Can you see that clear enough?
The Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination based upon national origin. Such discrimination can be based either upon the country of an individual's birth or where he or she and the ancestor originated. Census data indicated that the Hispanic population is a fast growing segment of our nation's population. The Justice Department has taken enforcement action against municipal governments, have tried to reduce or limit the number of Hispanic families that may live in their communities. Lenders have been sued under both the Fair Housing Act and Equal Opportunity Act. They have imposed more stringent underwriting standards on home loans and made loans lose half. The department also has sued lenders for discrimination against Native Americans.
Super. Thanks very much for reading that for me, Ryan. Anybody got any thoughts or comments on that slide or anything like to share? Any questions? Okay, good. Hopefully we're all good on that one. We talked about disability already a little bit. I'm just going to roll this one out. And then maybe, Suzette, would you mind reading this one for me? This is definitely one that you're close to. It would be helpful to have you read that for us.
Okay. The Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination on the basis of disabilities in all types of housing transactions. The act defines persons with a disability to mean those individuals with mental or physical impairments that substantially limit one or more major life activities. The term mental or physical impairment may include conditions such as blindness, hearing impairment, mobility impairment, HIV infection, mental retardation, alcoholism, drug addiction, chronic fatigue, learning disabilities, head injury, and mental illness. The term major life activity may include seeing, hearing, walking, breathing, performing manual tasks, caring for oneself, learning, speaking, or working. The Fair Housing Act affords no protection to individuals with or without disabilities who present a direct threat to the person or property of others. Another area is ensuring that newly construction multifamily housing is built in accordance with the Fair Housing Act accessibility requirements so that it is accessible to and usable by people with disabilities, and in particular to those who use wheelchairs.
Super, well read. Thank you very much for that, Suzette. Any comments on that one, Suzette?
Well, actually, I'm only now barely part-time working for a builder. I worked full-time for 8 years for a builder. And so we did deal with this. Now, of course, you can get your wheelchairs and things through the typical houses. But we had a couple come in and go, I have ADA issues and I want a different shower. I want a different, and it was really a fine line how to charge them a little bit more so that they could get in to certain things a little more accessibly. And because it didn't happen very often, they kind of didn't touch extra fees. But that was a fine line when they started requiring, when they wanted a little bit more than just the typical open hallways and doorways, bigger doorways into bedrooms and things.
Yeah,
it's
very
touchy.
good. Yeah, it is. I had an agent on this class previously when it was run a few months ago, and they had a client. I think they were representing the seller, and the buyer came in and said, "Yeah, we definitely buy the house." And they got into contract, and they said, "You know, we would really like some of these areas to be changed." you know, to be more comfortable for whatever their disability was. I think it was wheelchair and, you know, whatnot. And the seller agreed to do some of these alterations for them. And then they pulled out. They pulled out at the end. So then he got this house that he'd changed, and he spent quite a few $1,000s changing the way in which the house would operate to accommodate this new buyer, and it fell through. So just be aware of that. If that happens, far better to allow the buyer to make those adjustments when they own the home. Unfortunately, I looked at the whole transaction, looked like it was going to run through very nicely to the end, but it didn't. It fell apart, and of course that seller lost money on it. So just be careful on that if that happens with any of your clients. Any other thoughts or comments on that slide? All right. So a couple of thoughts here we might want to think about. I'll just put some notes up here that might be helpful. Some individuals with disabilities may live together in congregate living arrangements, often referred to as group homes. The Fair Housing Act prohibits municipalities and other local government entities from making or zoning or land use decisions or implementing land use policies that exclude or otherwise discriminate against individuals with disabilities. Fair Housing Act makes it unlawful to do the following: to utilize land use policies or actions that treat groups of persons with disability less favorably than those with non-disabled persons, to take action against or deny a permit for a home because of the disability of individuals who live or would live there, and to refuse to make reasonable accommodations in land use and zoning policies and procedures where such accommodations may be necessary to afford persons or groups of persons with disabilities an equal opportunity to use and enjoy the house. And they use this word enjoy quite a bit. So, you know, it's what makes the experience enjoyable or not enjoyable. We have to be careful we're not discriminating against those that may not find full joy in the property. Any comments on that slide? All right. Some other thoughts here. Who'd like to read that one for me? Some interesting information on this. Rod, would you like to read that for me, please?
Who did you say?
Well, who's that speaking?
Robin.
Maybe Robbie, yes. Would you like to read it for me?
Sure.
Thank you so much.
The Fair Housing Act defines discrimination in housing against persons with disability to include a failure to design or construct certain new multifamily dwellings so that they are accessible to and usable by persons with disabilities, and particular people who use wheelchairs. The Act requires all newly constructed multifamily dwellings of 4 or more units intended for the first occupancy after March 13, 1991, to have certain features: an accessible entrance on the accessible route, accessible common and public use areas, doors sufficiently wide and accommodate wheelchairs, accessible routes into and through each dwelling, light switches, electrical outlets, and thermostats in accessible location, reinforcement in bathroom walls to accommodate grab bar installations, and usable kitchens and bathrooms configured so that the wheelchair can maneuver about the space. Developers, builders, owners, and architects responsible for the design or construction of new multifamily housing may be held liable under the Fair Housing Act if their buildings fail to meet the design requirements.
Perfect. So that's quite a detailed note there in that section 423601. Any thoughts or comments on that one, Robbie?
I guess, I don't know, it's tough because I've worked for a builder myself. It's just so expensive, you know. How do you get those things in there? I mean, is that something that the buyer is expected to pay for extra? You know, would that be an upgrade, or how does that work?
Yeah, I think what this is saying is that they've probably got to make their plans so that they can accommodate anybody that may buy that home. And if you notice, they're also talking about weight regulations on the floors so they can take extra equipment if it's needed. So they may not necessarily have or need to have those, I guess, access bars or whatever you might call them, but the walls should be able to take those access bars. That's what the builders have got to do. And this is for obviously new construction platforms. They're told now that they need to make sure they are building these homes so they can accommodate anybody that may have a disability that may need some extra equipment or support material in that home. Anybody got any other comments on that slide?
Even Ellen Morris here. I think part of this is applying to the multifamilies of 4 or more units.
Correct. Yeah.
And so there is a differentiation between a single family dwelling and multifamily. And I think Suzette may have mentioned that a little bit, of a client coming in on a single family home and then saying, well, we need these alterations to fit the scope of our parameters for our disabilities. And my understanding of that is that there is a requirement to accommodate them, but they are responsible for the charges that are incurred. It isn't, for example, with a landlord that has a rental and somebody comes in and they have a disability and the house isn't quite suitable for that disability, they can request the landlord to make those alterations, but those alterations are done at the expense of the renter. That's my understanding.
Anybody else have a comment on that? I thought someone might have said something. No, but yeah, I understand that to be the same. That everything is workable, but if there are some more costs involved to do that, then they can charge accordingly. Okay, let's go on to the multi-family dwellings. Ground floors for all building must be accessible by someone in a wheelchair. Environmental and electric switches, controls, outlets must be reachable from a wheelchair. Wide doorways for wheelchairs, and reinforced walls in kitchens and bathrooms for installation of the grab bars. Buildings, adult only apartments and or complexes are not allowed. Exceptions will be for accommodation of the elderly. Sometimes you may have a 50 or a 60 plus area, and of course that would be an exception. Federal fair housing laws, penalties and risk reduction. So think about this. Prevention, obviously keep accurate records. When we're working with clients to make sure that we are keeping good records in case we need to refer to them in this area. Establish safe and systematic procedures, use objective criteria in selecting properties, allow the customer to set the limits, provide choices and variety. Of course, violations for us, fine, and our license could be at risk. Anybody got any comments or thoughts on that slide? Phil, what do you think about that? Any thoughts from you on that slide you might want to share?
I think the important thing on that slide to me is accurate records. Anytime there ever seems to be something where somebody has a concern, any emails or text messages or notes that you have with dates and times, someone says, I got my application in first. It's easy to show on a text message who got it in, when, or anything else like that. And so I think the importance is when you have a conversation with someone on the phone, write that down, take notes. If you ever go to court or anything else like that, those notes are imperative, especially if you date them and time them and everything else like that as best of your ability.
Yeah, perfect. And I would suggest you might use email to record those, because emails are much easier to find than text messages. So if you've had a text message or you've had a phone call or an agreement in person, it's good just to confirm it with the parties concerned with an email, because down the track you can find an email very quickly, where sometimes finding just the text message itself, when you've got to scroll through it, can take quite a lot of time. But if you confirm what has been agreed or said, either in person or on the telephone or through text with an email, it's very easy to locate that record. That feels exactly right. There may become a time that you need to use the record. I know that we had very early on in our time in this industry, we had a situation where, in fact, it was our client was committing mortgage forward as it was so happened. And luckily, we had it all documented, and we were able to allow the broker to take that up and follow it through. But if we'd not had all that information, that detail, it would have been very difficult to follow through with that uncomfortable situation as it was at that time. Records are important. You've got to be able to find them, of course. Okay, let's talk a little bit about navigating with multiple offers, because we are in an unusual market at the moment. Last couple of years has probably been more like a seller's market, but different types of seller's market. Seller's market we have today is different to the seller's market we had a year ago. And those of you are dealing with lots of buyers will notice it's still a seller's market, but it's a different type of market. I'm going to show you a video here. It's one from the window to the law from the National Association of Realtors. And it will talk a little bit about how we might be able to carefully navigate with multiple offers when we're talking about protecting ourselves and our client with regards to discrimination. So I'm going to see if I can just open up this link. I may have to stop share and start share. Let me just see what will happen on this. Give me a moment. I'll just pull this together. Let's see if we can just do this. This one here. All right. Give me the thumbs up if you can see this. Can you see this? Or a thumbs up on this?
Hi,
Okay.
I'm Deanne Romarowitz, Associate Counsel at NAR. Presenting and negotiating multiple offers brings the potential for misunderstanding and missed opportunities. But by adhering to a few fundamental principles, real estate professionals can help avoid complaints and fair housing issues while helping both the seller and buyer understand their options. Multiple offers often arise when buyer demand exceeds the inventory of listed properties. Here are 3 principles you should follow when navigating multiple offers with your clients. First, be mindful of your legal and ethical duties. Be familiar with the laws and regulations in your state that spell out duties owed to a client, timetables for presenting offers, and what may be disclosed to the other party in a multiple offer situation. For example, some states expressly prohibit revealing the terms of a buyer's offer without that buyer's consent. The Realtor Code of Ethics also applies to multiple offer scenarios. Article 1 requires realtors to protect and promote the interests of their client while treating all parties honestly. And Standard Practice 1-15 requires a realtor, with the seller's approval, to disclose the existence of other offers on the property when asked by a cooperating broker or buyer. Second, be aware that buyer love letters can trigger fair housing concerns. A buyer love letter could include letters, videos, photos, or any communication that accompanies an offer from a potential buyer in an effort to appeal to the seller. These love letters often innocently include personal information that can reveal a prohibited basis for discrimination, such as, "We can see our family celebrating Christmas around the fireplace," or "The wide hallways will accommodate my wheelchair." Remember, fair housing laws are all about eliminating discrimination and ensuring that anyone who is qualified can purchase real estate. A love letter can trigger implicit bias, putting a seller in a position of preferring a buyer based on a feeling or something that the seller just likes about the buyer. Accepting an offer based on anything other than the price, terms, and merits of the offer might violate fair housing law. Real estate professionals should discourage the use and consideration of buyer love letters to reduce the risk of discrimination. Third, remember that the client makes the decisions. As a real estate professional, you can educate your clients about multiple offers and the various strategies for responding to them. You can even offer advice and suggestions based on your knowledge and experience. But it's up to the client to decide which offers and counteroffers to negotiate, reject, and ultimately accept. With these fundamentals in mind, here are some best practices you can use in a multiple offer situation. If you're the listing broker, discuss the potential for multiple offers at the listing interview. Explain the options available to the seller and get the seller's instruction for handling multiple offers. Explain the fair housing implications of a buyer love letter. Confirm that such letters should not be accepted. And if the seller insists on reading a love letter, advise that they seek legal counsel and document their decision-making process. Get the seller's direction whether to disclose the existence of multiple offers to prospective buyers. And then make reasonable efforts to keep buyers' representatives up to date on the status of their offers. If you're the buyer's broker, educate buyer clients about the current market and their options for making an offer. Remind your buyer that they may not know if there are other offers on the table. Inform the buyer that the terms of their offer may not be treated as confidential unless required by state law. If the buyer insists on including a love letter, explain the fair housing concerns and do not read or accept the letter. You can help avoid complaints and reduce the stress inherent in multiple offers when you remember the fundamental rules and treat all parties honestly. More resources are available at nar.realtor, including a downloadable client brochure that explains the multiple offer process. Thanks for watching.
Okay, let me just redo that share. Where's that gone? Just bear with me a moment. I am struggling to find where I'm going here. Sometimes I lose myself on these shares. Let's see where it is. Oh, here it is. Here it is. There we go. Okay, I think I'm back there. Caught up with myself. All right. All right, any comments on that little video there? This is what we basically got from the video, some of the main areas. Let's just pull those in. There we go. All right, who'd like to comment on that video? Anybody seen that video before? No? Okay. Joshua, you want to comment on the video? What did you learn from the video?
I don't know if you want to hear my comments.
Yeah, I always want to hear your comments.
So I've only been doing real estate less than 2 years. And so this is a super, super great reminder of what's ethical and what's not. You know, especially as we join teams when we first come on as a real estate agent or a realtor. And because I joined a team my first year to be able to get a lot of that basis, foundation, and background of real estate. Although I was an investor previous to jumping into real estate, being a real estate agent is very different from being an investor in real estate. So not having listed any homes because my team lead was listing all the homes and then going off on my own, a lot of this stuff I have to be mindful of as I'm listing a home. One of the big ones is obviously the love letters, being a trigger for fair housing. My question and my only concern is when I'm representing buyers, and my fiduciary duty to my buyers is to do they're the end all, what they say goes in many cases, and all I can do is educate them. But if they want to submit a love letter as we are describing it in this scenario, can I or can I not educate and coach them on writing a love letter that is within those standards, those fair housing laws?
That's a great question. Who'd like to answer that question for Josh, rather than me answer it all the time? Who'd like to take up that little question? If you've got a buyer, you're representing the buyer, and they're really excited about writing up a love letter because they do want to get this house. They've been, I don't know, maybe they've already had a few offers rejected and they're really keen to get this one. How would you respond, or how would you navigate that course, helping them understand the difficulty working with love letters? Robin, how about you? Because I think you mentioned this earlier on, if I remember rightly. Is this one of the topics you mentioned early on in this class? I think it might have been.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, I mean, when I first started doing real estate, I thought they were fine, and I actually did some of them. But I think after, talking to my broker and seeing that some of the pitfalls that I could fall in, I don't want anything to do with them now, because actually it kind of scares me a little bit, because you could get yourself in trouble and your client can definitely be in trouble. So that was a conversation that I've had to have with clients, that, yeah, it's nice to know who's coming into your house, but do you really want that liability of somebody coming up to you and saying, hey, you chose them because, they're a cute little family and they have little kids and we're a gay couple, or, you could really get yourself in trouble.
Yeah,
so I've had conversations with clients where you probably don't want to take those.
Yeah.
The other hard thing is, with so many investors and so many big corporations coming in and offering these great offers on the home for the seller in a neighborhood, the seller might be leaning towards one offer over the other because of that reason, because of the individual versus the investor, that are both great offers, but that for that reason they decide to go with one or the other. I mean, how do you navigate that conversation with the seller on the other side, right? Not talking about the buyer anymore, but talking about the seller.
Yeah. As of January 2021, the NAR are actually, they pulled out a rule that says we should not encourage or accept love letters as realtors. So if we've got a client that wants to do that, we ask them, you better get some legal counsel, because that is out of our range. We don't get involved in that, because it is too close to crossing some of those discriminative boundaries.
Question though, if you're the seller and the buyer just attaches it anyway, could you choose just not to look at it?
Correct. Yes, you can. And if I was representing the seller, I'd say, don't read it, because then you're not going to be anyway persuaded one way or the other by the content of that letter. What you've got to figure out is what is in the love letter that's not in the offer. And it is usually emotions, or it is platforms that cross these boundaries in Fair Housing Association laws. The offer should have everything in there. It's going to have obviously the price, it's going to have earnest money, it's going to have all the conditions of the transaction, it's going to have the deadline dates, it's going to have whatever flexibility or good or parts of the actual transaction that are going to be favorable to the seller to receive. So what is going to be in the love letter that's not in the offer? That's the way in which I would look at it. And once you figure that out, you'll think, well, most likely the love letter is going to contain things about the family, maybe contain emotional platforms that they're trying to trigger the seller to favor them based on things that are not in the actual offer. Does that make sense?
They also often put a photo in, which can be a problem.
That's a huge problem. Yeah, because you often are going to see that, well, you're most likely going to see the color of them in a photograph, but you're probably going to see the makeup of the family. You're going to probably see maybe some religious triggers, maybe some disability triggers. That photograph can tell you an awful lot about that family. or the buyer, whether it's an individual or group of people or whatever. Any other thoughts?
Excuse me.
Thanks, Julia. Fire away.
I think a cover letter that restates the contract, I think, can be good. I do feel that as we've all sifted through contracts, and if there is, or even in the email that you're sending the contract, very condensed statement of the facts of the contract, I think that those can be beneficial and sometimes more clear than buried in the contract, as far as willing to lease back, or any technical terms that would benefit the seller as far as their move, as far as flexibility, we'll offer them a lease back. I think those things, that would be what would need to be addressed. And I think you could, and we are battling. And I always tell my people, it's just all about the money. And it really is. And what will the seller, with the buyer work with this? But I think sometimes I've had people just zing over contracts without anything. And I think sometimes it's a little bit empty. And so a cover letter that just addresses the details of the contract sometimes can help. In my experience. I don't know if anybody else feels that way, but I do think sometimes I feel if I just get this, here's an offer and it's attached to an email, it's a little bit empty.
Gotcha. So a cover letter might just highlight some of the conditions in that offer.
Facts. Yeah.
Just the facts, correct.
And the strength of the buyer, yeah.
That would be fine. Anybody else got any thoughts or comments on this topic? I know we've drilled down a little bit deeper on this than usual, but I think it's important that we understand what the federal fair housing law is on this, and make sure we're protected. We're protecting ourselves, obviously our licenses, and we're protecting our clients. Anybody got any thoughts before we move on to another topic on this?
My thought possibly is that in this market, you're getting so many offers and people just send over those letters, and you could say, yeah, we didn't read them, but it's almost good to protect yourself by sending out an email to everybody saying we will not be looking at these love letters or making any decisions on personal aspects, just so you're covering yourself. Maybe
that's a good idea.
I've been seeing that on MLSs in the agent remarks. They're making those comments now. We won't be taking love letters.
Perfect. And if we can educate the buyer's agent can educate their buyer. And ultimately, they've got lots of things they can include in their offer, which still makes them completely neutral. And it really shouldn't matter who's buying the home. That's what we're really talking about when it comes to the fair housing laws that we need to comply with. Good. Any final comments on this topic before we move on to the next? All right, let's doodle on here. This was highlighted a little bit earlier, I think, from Robin, actually, the ADA. Americans with Disabilities Act prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities in several areas, including employment, transportation, public accommodations, communications, access to state and local government programs and services. As it relates to employment, Title I of the ADA protects the rights of both employees and job seekers. ADA also established requirements for telecommunications related services. Title IV, which is regulated by the Federal Communications Commission, also requires closed captioning of federal funded public service announcements, and we often see that. That brings up our second keyword. It should pop on the screen in a moment. There we go. So second keyword in this class, as we're doing quite well on time, employment. So EMPLOYMENT, employment will be the second keyword. I can't tell you what the first one was. It did, I think, begin with the letter E, actually, rightly. But if you've got a problem with the first keyword, talk to Leslie Ann privately through chat. The second keyword is employment. Equal Credit Opportunities Act prohibits creditors from discrimination against credit applicants on the basis of race, colour, religion, national origin, sex, marital status, age, because an application receives income from a public assistance programme, or because an applicant has in good faith exercised any right under the Consumer Credit Protection Act. Anybody like to comment on that Act of 1974? You notice my style. If nobody comments, I just pick someone. It's brilliant, isn't it? Betty, how would you like to comment on that for me? Are you still with me, Betty? Let me see. I've got you on my list.
I
Can you
am.
unmute? There she is.
I
There
was
she
on
is. I can see her now. Talk to us about this one, Betty. I don't know how much you know about it, but talk to me about the importance of it.
Well, I mean, people credit opportunity. You just, I don't know how to comment on it. I mean, credit is credit. So, prohibits credit.
So there was a time where certain establishments or organizations, a company might favor a type of person for more credit than another. And this act was brought in 1974 to say, hey, you know, if we're going to give credit to someone, it shouldn't really matter about their race, color, religion, national origin, sex, marital status, or age. Let's just, obviously, they've got to be 18 plus in order to get a loan, but let's make sure that we're treating everybody the same. That's what this act was brought in for, to make sure the playing field is good for everybody. Anybody got any comments on that slide or anything they'd like to add to that act? Okay. Here's some thoughts you might want to just put into your mind. Legal to discriminate on age or marital status in granting credit. Lender cannot make oral or written statements which might discourage people from making an application. Lender cannot inquire about childcare problems or childcare support payments unless it's given voluntary. Utah fair housing laws prohibit discrimination in lending based on the source of funds, such as public assistance. So you can't sort of get into that little pot there where you're finding out they're getting public assistance from another source that may affect their credit receiving of. Any comments on that slide? We do have this little form. You may or may not have seen this. It's the credit report contingency addendum to a real estate purchase contract. Anybody use that one before? Anybody know why they might use that one? Or maybe why it might be used in the past. It's not used that often these days, but it is there. Sometimes it will be used. Anybody got any idea on that?
Stephen, I've got a comment.
Yes.
This is super interesting. So the reason ECOA, or what we're talking about here, one of the reasons, there were many reasons, but one that I've heard of in the past is mortgage lenders often discounted a married woman's income, especially if she was at childbearing age. And that's just so against what we believe as the United States. But that was one thing that they were doing. They were discounting a married woman's income, which, yeah, that's why one of the reasons why this act came about. Another one that was interesting that I read about one time was this: before this act came into place, what was happening in the community of African Americans or Black individuals is that they were only being allowed to live in certain areas, which limited and prohibited them from getting access to stronger schools potentially, or better education, or higher income paying jobs. And we are still seeing the effects of that to this day, I think.
Yeah, you're right. Very good. Well highlighted. While you're still with me, Joshua, do you have any idea where you might use this form?
I don't know. I've actually never had to use this form, so I have no clue.
I think I've used it for seller finance.
Oh, Betty Jo, tell me what you think.
Seller finance contract.
Yeah, that's usually the time we use it. Basically, you're going to let that seller know a little bit more information, and this is the seller giving. So this is the buyer letting the seller have that information. Good. Okay, let's move on. Truth in lending. Anybody tell me what truth in lending regulation Z is? It's funny when I look at the letter Z, because in England we always call that a Z. But anyway, there we have it. Regulation Z. Anybody tell me what that is about? Anybody remember what that is about? Ellen, can you remember what it's about, Ellen? I bet you can probably remember. I'll give you some help.
Yeah, well,
Read this for me.
okay, I can do that.
Yeah, perfect.
Federal law designed to promote the informed use of consumer credit, called the Consumer Credit Protection Act of 1968, also known as the Truth in Lending Act, TILA, of 1968, of which Regulation Z is part of. All disclosures are required about the terms and cost of loans to standardize how borrowing costs are calculated and disclosed. TILA also gives consumers the right to cancel certain credit transactions that involve a lien on a consumer's principal dwelling, regulates certain credit card practices, and provides a means for fair and timely resolution of credit billing disputes.
Perfect. Do you want to summarize roughly what that is, Alan, for us?
Well, I think one of the things is, you know, that it's stated right here, truth in lending, that, you know, part of it is required to disclose all of the terms so that the person that's entering into that agreement knows what those terms are. And that goes along with the 3 days where if anything is changed on those closing HUDs or those preliminary HUDs, even one number is changed, it resets that clock again for the protection of the consumer.
Perfect. Yeah, we're disclosing everything, making sure the consumer understands what they're getting into. Perfect. Well done. Here's some other thoughts on this one, which might be helpful for us just to remind ourselves on. Who'd like to read this one for me? It's only a short one. Who'd like to read that for me? Who we got? Rod, do you want to wander through that one for me, please? I just loaded in.
Sure. Truth in lending applies to home mortgages, home equity loan, reverse mortgages, credit cards, installment loans, and some student loans. Lenders are required to provide borrowers with. Mortgage lenders are prohibited from using unfair practices that might give to conflict of interest between lender and mortgage broker, access to interest rates, monthly billing statements, notice in writing of fees and finance charges, notify in writing when there is a charge of interest rates on variable rate loans, and receive fair and timely responses to billing disputes.
Perfect. Perfect. So basically, we're making sure that the consumer knows everything that's going on. And if you're ever dealing with a company that's not doing this, then you might want to question whether or not that's a good lending company to be working with. Anybody have any challenges with this, with any of their transactions? Okay, good. Let's move on to Real Estate Settlement Procedure Act, which is the RESPA.
Can I just share a funny story with that? Just 2 days ago, just 2 days, not this one, but the loans and all that. My buyer says, okay, I'm going to need to sign my lock-in. He said, I just want your expertise on whether to sign today or not. And I laughed and I said, so basically you want me to look into my crystal ball and tell you if the rate's going to go up or down in the next 2 or 3 days? And he's like, yeah, who can you call? Can you give me some better advice? And I said, no.
Yeah, expertise.
Yeah, I was like, no, I cannot give you that on if the rates are going to change up or down. Just go with what your lender's saying, and that's your choice whether to lock in today or in 3 weeks. Yeah,
perfect. Great story. Thanks for sharing, Suzette. All right, so Real Estate Settlement Procedure Act 1974. The Act requires lenders, mortgages. Whoops, I went a bit too quick then. Lenders, mortgage brokers, or services of home loans to provide borrowers with pertinent and timely disclosures regarding the nature and cost of the real estate settlement process, which they do. And as Ellen just mentioned, you've got that sort of a few days there for them to review the CD and the HUD and whatnot. Let's go into the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. Anybody got any idea what that was about? Anybody remember what that one was about? Fair competition, ultimately. United States antitrust law, which prescribes the rule of free competition among those engaged in commerce, prohibits companies from colluding or merging to form a monopoly. Passed by Congress and named for Senator John Sherman, who was the principal author of that act. This is the land of free, and so I think everybody has the opportunity to compete in commerce, but this prohibits it the companies from taking over a monopoly in one area. Uniform Commercial Code, which is the UCC. Basically, this is 4 areas. Just remember: manufactured, warehouse, sold, and delivered. So basically, it was in 1952. The Uniform Commercial Code is one of a number of uniform acts that have been established as law with an objective of harmonizing the laws of sales and other commercial transactions across the United States, including all states, District of Columbia, and the territories of the United States. For example, goods may be manufactured in one state, warehoused in another state, sold from a different state, and then delivered in another state. So that's what that UCC, Uniform Commercial Code, was all about. If you just remember those 4 pieces of the puzzle: manufactured, that's where it's built, it's made; warehouse, that's where it's stored; sold is where it's sold, and of course it can be delivered also to any state. Any comment on that code? Good. Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. You'll notice that little logo there, United States Environmental Protection Agency. Basically, this is to make sure we all have some nice clean air and land and water. National efforts to reduce environmental risk based on the available scientific information. Federal laws protecting human health and environment and administered and enforced fairly. Environmental stewardship is integral to the US policies concerning natural resources, human health, economic growth, energy, transport, agriculture, industry, and international trade. All parties of society, community, individuals, businesses, and state, local, and tribal governments have access to accurate information sufficient to effectively participate in managing human health and environmental risks. Contaminated lands and toxic sites are to be cleaned up by potentially responsible parties and revitalized. And finally, chemicals in the marketplace are reviewed for safety. Anybody dealt with land that has had some challenges with contaminated soil or toxics in the soil that had to deal with on a purchase or a sale? Okay. Any questions on the EPA? All right. Did I hear someone chime in or not then? No? Okay. Let's talk about the National Do Not Call list. Who can tell me if they know anything about that? Nobody knows anything about that.
Nothing.
Okay.
I don't want to know about it. Don't tell me.
You'll be glad you came on this little journey, Joshua, figuring out all these new little twists and turns. And most of us don't know everything. Most of us know something about everything, but not everything about everything. So let's have a look at this. It is quite an important topic. Maybe we can discuss this a little bit. I've got a video to show you on this. Hopefully it will come up in a minute. I'll see if I can show it to you. It's only about 3 or 4 minutes long. But we do need to watch out for the TPA, the TCPA, sorry. These guys will catch us if we are a problem on this. Oh, okay, that comes off third keyword. Let's pull that up first, and then we'll talk about this. Established is the third keyword. ESTABLISHED, that should be flashing on your screen. Established. The other two did begin with the letter E, but I can't tell you what they are. If you missed one of the other two, talk to Leslie Ann privately through chat. That's the third keyword, established. All right, let's have some fun on this one and see what we can learn. I'll put a note up here. Real estate agents must comply with the National Do Not Call rules. Anyone who has placed their number on the Do Not Call registry list must not be called. In fact, what I'm going to do, I think I've missed that video. Let me see if I can just pull out of this and find it. That video. I should have pulled that link up. Is that the one there? No, it isn't. Okay. No, okay, it's coming up. That video is coming up. I want to make sure I've got it there. That's a good little video. So anybody that's obviously placed their number on the do not call list, the registry we should not call, if they haven't done that, and we can call them between the hours of 8 a.m. and 9 p.m. There are some exceptions here. Obviously, if we have a personal relationship with them, or if we've already established a business relationship with them, calling about a service that's been originally provided. So obviously, we can do that. And of course, the final one is if we've got written permission to call them. So let's have a look at this little video from Window to the Law. I'll see if I can move a bit quicker this time and I'll load it in. I wonder if that'll let me load it in. Okay. Give me a moment. All right. See. Just bear with me a moment. Takes me a while to find out where this link is. Okay, there it is. Let's see, that's the right one. Okay, let's do the share. This one. Okay. Give me the thumbs up if you can see this when it gets going. Oh, that didn't work. Hold on a minute. Are we good?
Hello, I'm John McCloskey, Senior Political Compliance Counsel and Director of Legal Affairs at NAR. Welcome to this episode of Window to the Law. In this episode, I will share with you an important legal update speaking to real estate professionals' ability to more freely use their cell phones for marketing purposes without fear of TCPA liability. On April 1st, 2021, the United States Supreme Court issued its long-awaited opinion in Facebook v. Duguid. In its unanimous decision, the Supreme Court not only overruled the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, but resolved a growing divide among federal courts by narrowly interpreting what constitutes an automated telephone dialing system, or ATDS, under the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, or TCPA. The court's holding made clear that the TCPA and its prior consent requirements only apply to devices that have the capacity to store or dial numbers, actually using a random or sequential number generator. Importantly, the decision has no impact and does not change adherence to existing do not call registry requirements. You may recall that the TCPA requires prior express consent when using an automated telephone dialing system to make calls or send texts to wireless numbers. Failure to obtain such consent can lead to legal liability and exorbitant penalties and fees. Prior to the Facebook decision, real estate professionals were oftentimes left wondering whether the use of their cellular phones to make individualized marketing calls triggered the TCPA consent requirements. A handful of federal courts, like the Ninth Circuit, created this confusion by interpreting the ATDS so broadly to include any device that could store telephone numbers, even if the device did not employ a random or sequential number generator. This broad definition implicated any smartphone used to make calls or send texts. The Supreme Court recognized the impracticality of such a broad definition and reasoned that, and I quote, expanding the definition of an auto dialer to encompass any equipment that merely stores and dials telephone numbers would take a chainsaw to these nuanced problems when Congress meant to use a scalpel, end quote. While the Facebook decision will likely quell caustic and costly class action TCPA lawsuits, don't get your hopes up too high yet. The Supreme Court's opinion left some ambiguity as to what constitutes capacity and use under the definition of an ATDS. As a result, certain calling technologies, such as predictive dialers and blast texts, may be the subject of future litigation on this issue. Furthermore, the Facebook decision did not sit well with certain pro-consumer rights federal and state legislators who believe the TCPA should be broadly applied. Therefore, Congress, and perhaps even state legislatures, may consider new laws affecting marketing calls on the heels of the Facebook decision. That said, as a result of the Facebook decision, real estate professionals may, without fear of TCPA liability, use their cell phones to make marketing calls and texts without consent so long as they are not using a random or sequential number generator and are otherwise adhering to the do not call registry restrictions. Obtaining prior consent from those you are looking to call or text for marketing purposes is still highly recommended and remains the gold standard to protecting against TCPA liability. Check out NAR's TCPA and do not call resources to ensure your calling and texting activities are compliant. And thank you for watching this episode of Window to the Law.
All right, let's see if I can get back to where we were. Why it always takes me a long time to find the screen. Anybody seen that video before? Nobody saw the video before, huh? Okay. So just bear with me a moment. Does anybody have any experience of using automated dial calls? Good, that's where we are. Oh, here we go. I should be able to find that now. I don't know why it takes me so long to do this every time, but it does. There it is. Okay. All right, here we go. Okay, let's pull in Phil. Phil, would you like to comment on what you learned from that video we just watched?
Yeah, just have to be careful as to who we contact and how we contact them. If they're auto-generated, we can't contact them that way. But if we have their phone numbers and things like that, we can contact them as long as it's within a reasonable hours. And we have some type of relationship with them.
Yeah, good. We're probably going to see more on this topic as time continues. So just be aware how you're contacting folk. Obviously, if they're hopefully you start off with your SOI anyway, which is your personal relationship with people. But if you do come across someone who clearly asks you not to send them an email or not to call them, then just put them on your do not call list, because we are seeing more and more cases where people are suing individuals or companies because they are calling them, without invitation. And if you're like me, you probably get unsolicited calls every day from someone. It's usually a robot that comes in and it can just about send you nuts. So just be careful when you're calling folk that you are compliance with the National Do Not Call law.
Stephen?
Yes.
Hey, one question that keeps coming up. I'm on a do not call list, but I get several phone calls like everybody else that manage to get through. When I call back to find out why they're getting through the do not call list, they're telling me you have to re-register every 2 years. Has anybody else been involved with that? I thought once you're on it forever. Or is that anything else that we need to look forward to? Because if we have clients that are on it are saying do not call, and then 2 years later we can.
Yeah, I've never heard of that before, Ryan. I thought when you're on the list, you're on the list, but there probably is a time period. And I wonder if it's because people also change their telephone numbers. And so maybe they've got a time period that they have to re-register. That would probably make sense, because often when you change a number, it might go to someone else and they'd be happy to receive calls. That's worth highlighting, Ryan. I might see if I can find out more on that information. Anybody else here know about that information?
No, but I'm digging how you say telephone.
Oh, how do you say it?
I say more telephone, but you probably don't hear your own accent. It's absolutely adorable.
Oh, you're very kind. That's all I can do, That's all I can do. Well, let's have a look at what we looked at today, see if we can learn, highlight anything we learned. I'm going to load these in. I'm just going to go around everybody and see if you can just highlight something that you either were refreshed on or something that helped you better understand something in real estate law after running this class today. So let's start off with you, Suzette. I can see you there. So maybe you could tell us what you may have learned new or that was highlighted that was beneficial for you today?
As you could tell, I was just obviously mostly into that Disability Act, looking for more support even in the rentals. Technically, did I learn anything new in that? No, but it emphasized to me, be careful.
Yeah, great comment. Thanks. Joshua, what about you? There was some things you were a little bit ticklish on, but what stood out to you today you might share with everybody?
Not sure exactly. I mean, I pretty much understand pretty much all of it and didn't really have any additional thoughts. He covered it pretty well. The only question I have is, like, on the national do not call, do they talk anything about text messages, texting? Any text messages allowed after 9 p.m.?
Good question. I don't know the answer to that, but I would imagine that there must be some law that's with text messages as well. But I don't know the answer. I'll find out about that. Thank you.
Yeah, follow-up question to that as well. If someone reaches out through, as realtors, we receive a lot of leads from other sources that we pay for. Those individuals may be on the do not call list. Am I correct? But because they put in their information, they are allowing themselves to be solicited to, I guess you could call it, but essentially a phone call can be made to those individuals. Am I correct in saying that?
You have to be careful on where you're getting that information from. If they disclose that on the list you're receiving, that they have all agreed to have someone called, and then yes, but often some of these call lists are being sold without people's knowledge that their information is being sold to a third party. So you have to do
now, if someone puts in, let's say someone puts in their incorrect information, let's say they put in a phone number that is not valid on Zillow, how do we go about, because what I do personally is I will actually I'll actually look up their phone number online and I'll find it and I'll call them because they inquired about a property. So I feel like it's my duty to get them information about the property. And if they don't want to know more, then I have no problem putting them aside and not contacting them again. But in that scenario, if they do reach out without a valid phone number, are you allowed to go search for a phone number and call them?
I would say you probably are, because you already have that relationship established because they've already contacted you. So as long as you've got that recorded, you're all good.
Okay, cool.
Thanks, Joshua. Let's go to Robin. Robin, anything you'd like to share that might have been highlighted or something that you learned that was new that you'd like to share?
I learned about the disabilities, like what you're responsible for as a renter or a builder. And then I think a lot of it was just a good review of some things that sometimes I think maybe we just get out of the habit of or just don't even think about.
Yeah, super. Thank you. Jenny, how about you? Anything you'd like to highlight today that may have, be worth
I'm really
mentioning?
glad that we went over the love letters again, because that is one thing that I really have heartburn over. I always ask people not to send them, and you will still get people that do send them. My question is, if you have a listing and someone says you a love letter, do you have to forward it to the seller?
So the bottom line is you probably have to forward it to the seller, but if you educated the seller, they don't have to read it.
Okay.
Yes, I was going to say the same thing. I think you
That's-
are obligated to send it to them. But if you've had the conversation prior to this happening, that a love letter could technically get them in trouble, even though they don't mean to discriminate, someone could use it against them. It's wise that if any come in, you are obligated to share them, but you recommend that they don't read them.
Thank you.
And you can also counsel with if you're representing the buyer, you can say, just let you know that a lot of sellers will choose not to even look at the love letters because they don't want to be in conflict with the fair housing laws. Okay. And then of course that may be enough for your buyer to think, oh, maybe we won't do it. You can't guarantee that they're going to be read. That's basically what you're saying.
Yep.
Good. Thanks for that, Jenny. Ryan, what would you like to highlight today?
I was at the same thing with the love letters. In my case, though, if I get love letters, I'm the listing agent and I get love letters from the buyer's agent or that they have sent along with the offer, I automatically send it back to them, tell them I won't accept it, and it never is sent out to my seller. I kind of feel that if I did accept it, I'd be violating the Federal Fair Housing Act, truth, and I think that the buyer's agent is in violation of it, and at some point in time should be reported.
Thank you. Phil, anything you'd like to highlight today that may have stood out to you?
Oh, pretty straightforward. Just a reminder that all the small print at the bottom, all the contracts contain all these fun things. And it's if you're ever bored and need something to read, have a good time.
Yeah, send you to sleep. Betty Jo, how about you? Anything to highlight today?
No, it was a great recap. I think going over those stupid love letters. I kind of have my own opinion about those. You know, it's funny how we can, you know, not, I don't know if it's the right word is discriminate, but we value people's ability to qualify, whether they're conventional or cash or over FHA. And it's like, they qualify for that amount. Why should they be discriminated on the type of loan they have? You know, so why is it unfair to have a love letter? So I have different opinions about those, but it was a good review. You know, renters, all that stuff. So it was a great class. Thank you.
Super. Thanks, Betty Jo. Ellen, anything to add today?
Well, I just think most everything we went through was helpful and useful. I think a couple that stood out for me was equal credit opportunity and truth in lending. Just because I've had some experience with that actually happening and having to go to all regs because I had a little bit more knowledge to call the lender on the table when the lender was, you know, denying a loan that because they weren't counting income, that all regs required them to count. So it just that refresher there that kind of stuff is alive and well, and we see that kind of discrimination happening today, which is why we have these laws. So
thanks, Ellen. Great comment. Julia, anything to add?
I appreciated the historical aspect of these laws and changes because, you know, we've come a long way. You know, we've come a long way, and we still have room to grow. Even on our current MLS form, we use some words on that, you know, master bedroom and single family home. I think there's still room for some growth.
Yeah, we've come a long way. We're probably still going to keep developing good code of ethics, good practices. So wonderful. Thank you for being with us today. I think I covered everybody there. Hopefully Leslie Ann will have sent you that little link. I'll just make a note.
I just put it in the chat.
Okay, super. I have made a note. If for some reason you don't get credit within 5 days, please contact either me or Leslie Ann. We can figure out what's gone wrong. I will only copy and paste the information you